So Dogman has been up there as one of the peak animated movies I've watched this year, and as an adaptation movie, it's always interesting to see what changes the film makes in comparison to the original material, and there's a lot from this movie that I was outstandingly fascinated by, to where some of them I felt like were executed way better than what was done in the books. No offense to Dave Pilkey, I absolutely adored all his comics in my childhood. Anyways, what's up guys, this is Willie and welcome to another video where I thought it would be fun to highlight my personal favorite differences that the Dogman film did contrasted to its novel counterparts. So for this style of video, this is not going to be like those typical book and movie comparison sort of shtick. I'm creating a more subjective based approach where I'm solely gleaning in on the differences I liked in the film, as well as emphasizing on how its execution superiorate to its book counterparts. With all that out of the way, let's get on with the show. This one is probably the most empowering but also heartfelt change in the movie, in that we come to find out that Dogman's former owner, Officer Knight, had a girlfriend, and when the obvious situation happened, Dogman found his way back home in hopes that he could reunite with Alice, but then everything turns sorrow when Dogman finds his apartment to be half empty, which adds to a lot of this somber feeling with this scene, especially when the scenes of the empty spaces are interlaced with some semi-flashbacks to the good times Knight and Alice had together. Likewise, this whole scene is just pretty sad, especially coming to find out that Alice eventually left with a new person that she found, and to be fair, I understand that she could be probably weirded out by the fact that her boyfriend essentially now got replaced by his dog's head, but then again, it was really unfortunate how she kind of gave the cold shoulders with the way she just departed, which adds to a lot of the compel to Dogman's character, where there's a lot of an emphasis on the repercussions of his difference, which we see how it really greatly affected him. It does also force him into a new residence because the home has also been sold off. And comparing to the context of the book, Knight did not have a girlfriend. So changing that up a little bit with this movie contributes to a lot of the high emotion in this scene, and begins to establish the compelling storyline with Dogman now that he basically has nobody to be around with, which set up a lot on his end for what's to come in the movie. The next thing to talk about is the Butler, which in a turn of events, the movie decided to aesthetically switch up Petey's former Butler to be a more younger female character who kind of comes off as this really sassy-like figure who also embodies a lot of the modern pop culture aesthetically, so she does bring a lot more of a modernized dynamic to her character, as well as a bit of a dynamic personality, even though initially she seemed monotoned. I did like some of the one-liners she brought to the table in conjunction to the short amount of presence she had on screen. Plus also, the circumstances surrounding her termination from Petey has a lot more grounds to it, where in the book, the Butler would just get fired for being incredibly dim-witted, which is obviously the kind of workforce that Petey would not want to manage with. But I believe in the movie, they excel upon that a bit better, with the Butler coming off a bit more lazier and just not giving a crap about what is going on around work, which does lead to her firing. And then the circumstances after that just being a pest to Petey. As to her fine dynamic, that makes me kind of like the little aesthetical change with the Butler from the books. This next one was a quick one, but basically in the movie, the mayor is fed up with the constant cycle of Dogman arresting Petey just for the felon himself to find a way to escape. Which, I mean, you shouldn't really blame Dogman here. You should blame the incompetence of the cat jail for not really securing much escape routes. Like, that's so easily avoidable. But you know, who cares? Let's just talk about the main point. Basically, in the movie, the mayor declares Dogman is off the case, which in contrast to the books, he wasn't. And also to add on to that, in the context of the book, she eventually was found to be a villainous figure, which she does still embrace some of that mold in her movie counterpart, but her antics are more antagonistic than anywhere to like the villain level. Plus, a slight difference here, for more of the positive note, is that she will be announced to announce the pardoning of her Petey as well. But that doesn't change the fact that she still has her adverse sort of initiative, essentially forcing Chief into a corner that makes him declare Dogman's role on the case of Petey is now all void, which this adds to a very interesting storyline for Dogman moving forward, which obviously in conjunction to the narrative of him being alone, this essentially just continues the somber trajectory with his life, establishing more of the complexities with his plot line. Overall, the change up in the movie, was depressing for Dogman's sake, and I do sympathize with what he's going through. However, it continues to set up an interesting shift in Dogman's life, which we all know gets emphasized on truly when Lil Petey comes into his life. So next up, I want to point out that a lot of the changes that the movie made surrounds around the storyline of Tales of Two Kittens, because the Lil Petey factor of them all. And speaking of, the first change that is more for the aesthetical purposes is the cloning machine, where in the book, the machine was a little tiny box that clearly was suited for the size of a minimized clone, which is where Lil Petey epitomizes that function. However, in the movie, I like the little kink they did there by enlarging the machine, so the twist factor could be more intriguing, especially with how an enlarged machine could accommodate for a seemingly exact clone for Petey, which does really raise the stakes here for a twist factor of them all when we get the reveal of Lil Petey. And I also believe that this was also to give some more shock value to a certain kind of audience who are unfamiliar with this series' context, so it makes sense that the changes that they made with the cloning machine was to raise the bar for more of the thrill. I am a pro for the decision here, and such little details like this are ones that I'm willing to highlight throughout this video to really emphasize their significance to bolster the intrigue, but also entail the strong contrast to its novel counterpart. And I guess to stick where we're just at, we have the part where the movie brings in the undo button, which on the contrary to the graphic novel, there was no such storyline like this, and instead the instruction sheet that Petey reads ends off with no refunds. But for the movie counterpart, we got a little nice tweak here with the aforementioned undo button, which is obviously sold separately. And I like this change a lot, not just for like the humor it was potentially going to bring, but it's more because it's a strong piece of storyline that becomes the final testament to Petey's redemption arc. When the subplot with the undo button was reintroduced at the end of the movie, where probably most of the audience pretty much forgot about because everything else happening, it becomes the source of material that highlights the strength of Petey's bond with his child, and with his ultimate decision of discarding the little key down the drain, it totally demonstrated how central it was to Petey's storyline. And also on top of that, with Petey tarnishing that undo button, it was that final touch needed to signify Petey's good side and choosing the life of parenthood moving forward, which was great to see. And also, since we're here, I might as well mention a bit of a fallacy that I've been noticing with the undo button, where after this movie, I see some fans are kind of concerned about what would happen if some sort of living soul in the drain happened to interact with that button. Number one, that is a key which I'm pretty sure has to be hooked up with the cloning machine in order to function. And obviously, we know that Grandma took all the items he could find in Petey's lab, which also included the machine. So even then, Petey would have to purchase another machine that would take a while for him to receive, which after everything that's happened, he was never going to even consider it anyway. But yeah, a little fun way to clear the air for many people who were making theories about those possibilities. This next one, I am a bit conflicted on because I know most of the fans think that this part of the movie was kind of monotonous. However, I still personally think it was a solid add-on, and it's a scene where we have Grandpa return back to Petey's life, which, full disclosure, it plays out the exact same of how it is in the books. However, if you do pay attention to the book, this situation takes place after Petey had finally fulfilled his redemption story, but in the movie, they decided to integrate the Grandpa storyline within Petey's redemption arc that was still ongoing. And I know there's a lot of question marks of like, why did they even need this? However, I want to interject how their circumstances in the scene feels like more of an expander on Petey and Lil Pete's relationship, as Grandpa embodies a lot of the misery that Petey was embracing, and seeing how his dad has not changed years later, and seeing how he's essentially following that trajectory despite the love that his son has for him, is a nice way for it to dawn on him that his root of evil has just consumed him too much. And in the scene where Lil Pete essentially stands his ground to Grandpa about showing love, Petey's soaring expressions really says all to what I believe him reflecting on himself and how he has that opportunity to not retread his father's footsteps. So in my personal opinion, I think insulating this scene within Petey's redemption arc is actually not that bad, since I believe it makes things a lot more compelling to see where Petey's relationship with his son truly stands a testament. And also to iterate, it's more so to build up Petey's bond with Lil Pete to highlight more on what brings them closer, which is love, which makes itself another piece to the central story on Petey's end. Now for this next scene from the movie, it's one that I am having conflicting thoughts with, but basically the movie had a scene where we had the cinematic reveal to Dogman that Petey and Lil Pete were related, which reading back in the book, Dogman had no reaction whatsoever. It was just completely anticlimactic, which I mean, to be fair, it was in the middle of the ongoing combating against Flippy, which contrasting to the movie, this literally takes place after Dogman finally fulfilled his chance to cuff Petey again. And so when Lil Pete arrives and Dogman takes his moment to express his excitement to see his best friend back, he only then learns the biggest truth bomb that his bestie was the son of his rival Petey. Which, I mean, yes, it was riveting to watch how the reveal played out with just such cinematic nature displayed throughout it, and also giving us a really great reaction from Dogman. However, there can be the conflicting aspect of how it kind of makes Dogman look pretty dumb in this spot for not putting that one together when it was pretty obvious. Which, remember early in the movie when Dogman was formerly Greg, he was described as a smart dog, which he surely is when he's able to outsmart many of Petey's inventions. But the point here with him not being able to pick up on the fact that Lil Petey was a descendant of his father, despite how obvious it is, kind of ruins a lot of the notion with Dogman's characteristics. Which, I mean, to be fair, the same thing applies with the comic books. It's just that, like I said, the difference is that Dogman had no reaction to the discovery, unlike in the movie version. And let's switch things up on the pros of this change is that it also introduced a little dilemma Dogman had to make between arresting Petey in front of his child or reluctantly letting him go, despite the felon literally trying to kill him. But Dogman ultimately couldn't make a choice in that spot due to Flippy's interruption afterwards. But I will say, later on in the movie, Dogman was reluctant on arresting Petey after they partnered up to stop Flippy. Speak for where Dogman's choice ended up landing on. So in general, I like the change that they did in the film to create a more riveting reaction from Dogman rather than the anticlimactic one we got in the books. Now this next one is where the movie changes up a bit of the end scene in this spot. Where in a book, as Petey is about to fall and scorch himself into the volcano, Dogman uses a glider to rescue him and then proceed to arrest him. However, in the movie, they did a little change around to that, with Dogman not gliding his way to save Petey and instead using his tennis ball to save Petey from falling in. And on top of that, the felon himself is pardoned for being a do-gooder, which he is humbled by. And I like this change that he did in the movie for a more thematical purposes, which, don't get me wrong, that storyline for the book's sake is fine since Petey's redemption story is spread out throughout the books. However, for the movie, if Dogman still proceeded to arrest him afterwards, it would have been completely underwhelming from a more thematical standpoint. We're basically going back to square one from where we were at the start of the movie, and Petey's redemption arc just does not get proper closure to it. And also, on top of that, this scene can also act as the cog to the developing friendship between Dogman and Petey, where coming from rivals to partners was a very quick subplot that does have a great resolution in this scene, with Dogman being able to not only sacrifice his cherishable item just to save his longtime rival, also expresses reluctance when Chief tries to encourage him to cuff Petey, even after just saving him, which further emphasizes on the established camaraderie relationship that was developed between the two. Writing that is a satisfying resolution to that, which also in conjunction to Petey's redemption story, encompasses the strong differences this movie made to fulfill all the plots together without ruining any of them. That's my video for you, going through and highlighting my personal favorite differences the film did in comparison to the books. And with a Dogman 2 now in the planning stage, it's hyping me up to see what they are gonna offer. And when eventually that movie comes out, I'll make a similar-ish video like this one to create a little style here. That wraps up everything I gotta say. Take that chance to tap the like and subscribe for more coverage of movies like this down the road. So with that, I appreciate you all tuning in.